What if the single most powerful key to living a longer, healthier, and more purposeful life isn't your diet, your exercise routine, or even your genetics, but the strength of your social connections? Welcome to the Aging Well podcast, where we explore the science, stories, and strategies behind living a longer, healthier, and more purposeful life. I am your host, Dr. Jeff Armstrong, an exercise physiologist with a passion for making science simple and life better as we age. My guest is Kenneth Stern, founder of the Longevity Project, host of Stanford's Century Lives podcast, and the former CEO of NPR. He is the author of the new book, Healthy to 100, How Social Ties Lead to Long Lives, which explores how meaningful social connections are the overlooked key to living longer and living better. Today, we'll explore the global lessons from cultures that thrive through social fitness, the health costs of loneliness, and the practical steps that we can take to build deeper connection as we age, all in the pursuit of aging well. So Ken, welcome to the Aging Well podcast. Let's have you just start by telling us a little bit about yourself and what led you to the Longevity Project.
So, Jeff, thanks for having me on the show. So the Longevity Project actually began with, I think it's fair to say, with me getting a little bit older and beginning to think about sort of the aging challenges that I face and my family will face. But I really got the Longevity Project really began to form when I met the folks at the Stanford Center on Longevity. When I started talking to them, I thought I was going to have a conversation about aging, sort of what our last declining years are like. And they wanted to have a conversation with me about longevity, how we rethink our entire life course so that our longer lives can be healthier, more productive, and more purposeful. And I like that conversation a lot better than the aging conversation. So that's really got me into creating the Longevity Project and ultimately to writing the book that we're going to talk about in a few minutes.
So you've argued that the secret to living not just longer, but better is rooted in social connection. So how did you arrive at that conclusion while researching Healthy to 100, sorry?
Yeah. So it's not really a secret. We all know, I think at this point, know that social connection is important and loneliness is bad for our health. But it's like the weather. We all talk about, no one knows what to do about it. I actually got interested in social connection as a topic when I started to do my own podcast called Century Lives. We did a season on outlier communities in the U.S., places that age where people are living longer than the underlying data says they should be. And everywhere we went, from Presidio County, Texas, to Co-op City in the Bronx, the story didn't turn out to be about nutrition or exercise or good health care. It always turned about how people live highly connected lives. And that sort of turned me on to the topic of social connection in ways that I hadn't been thinking about before.
Yeah, on this podcast, we started off, and this is our fourth season, and I'm an exercise physiologist by training. And so exercise was like my key push, right? And I teach an exercise, it's pathophysiology and exercise course. And over the years of teaching that, I'd come to the conclusions that there's 4 things you need to do to live without disease and live longer. And that's to exercise, have physical activity, maintain a healthy body composition, eat a healthy diet, and don't smoke. But since doing this podcast, we have kind of picked up 2 more pillars, as we call them, one being sleep and the other being purposeful social connections. And I think those last 2 have really begun to elevate themselves above what I've been promoting as an exercise physiologist. And so many people do assume that diet and exercise are the keys to longevity. But like you said, when we look at the blue zones and we look at these areas where people are living longer, there are other things going on. And why has social connection been so overlooked in the conversation about health and aging?
I think it has to do, so I think all those things are important, right? So sleep is important, exercise, diet. I would never say that any of those things are irrelevant or unimportant. I think we've overlooked social connection because it's a little harder to sort of see the connection between community and life expectancy and health. It's just a little harder to understand that. And the second thing, it's a little harder to figure out what to do about it. There's tons of stuff out there about nutrition. I mean, endless materials. And there are a lot of experts like you, Jeff, who are helping people think through exercise and how to be more fit. I think social connection is sort of shoved aside because it's really hard to figure out how to do it. And we've gotten worse at it. So One of the things that actually frames this book, Healthy to 100, is the notion that life expectancy in the U.S. We all know that most of us know that life expectancy in the U.S. is not as good as it is in all of our peer countries. We do very poorly. It wasn't always that case. It wasn't back in the 80s, as recently as the 80s. Our life expectancy wasn't first among advanced economies, but certainly wasn't last. And it only started diverging from other countries when Bob Putnam talked about the death of social capital in this country, when unions started declining, churches started declining, sewing circles, PTA, we participated less. We spent all of our time alone. And that's what really, all the institutions that brought us together were in decline. And that's why it's so hard, because the things we've traditionally relied on to create social connection, to create community, are kind of dying on the vine. So what replaces it is the real question.
And it seems like, COVID really gave us a hit in terms of social connection.
Yeah.
And sure. I don't know that we've really fully recovered from that yet.
No, I think that's true. So I think that's a good observation, Jeff, right? So COVID was a hit. And I think technologies are a hit. There are great communications technology. We're talking across the country, 3,000 miles apart, which we wouldn't have done a few years ago. But the time that people spend on their phones or watching TV alone is just growing exponentially. So, I think that even as we recognize, as you have, Jeff, that social connection is more important, all the indicators are going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, and you talk about social fitness as being something that's as important, or I would argue probably even more important than physical fitness when it comes to longevity. But what does that mean, and how can our listeners and our viewers begin to strengthen it in their own lives?
So let me give you the framework for the book. So I wanted to know, as you mentioned the blue zones, but I was principally interested, and which Dan Buettner has written about social connection in the blue zones. And I think it's an important concept. But I was wanting for me, I wanted to know how people whose lives are much more like ours, who lived in complex, urban, stressful situations, how they were doing so well compared to us. So, like in Japan, the median life expectancy for women is now 90. I mean, it's just an incredible number. How are they doing it? So I spent time in Japan, Korea, Singapore, Spain, and Italy to try to figure out how those modern, complicated societies are doing well. And there are instructions from that, I think, around first and I think the first thing is to say about it is their public health strategies are focused on social health. How do you keep people connected in the second half of life? And there are a lot of lessons which I'm happy to walk through about how they're keeping people together, and making sure that people have connected, purposeful, and meaningful lives in the second half of life, just as they do in the first.
So in your research, which countries or cultures impressed you the most in how they build their social infrastructure for aging populations? You mentioned Japan. Is that one of your leading ones, or do you have another?
Yeah, so I'm going to start with Singapore, which is crazy about healthy aging. And these countries are crazy about it because they're much older than we are. So Japan, I'll mention, has 10% of the population over the age of 80, 30% over the age of 65. We're about 17. They can't survive as societies without having their older citizens be healthy and productive. So it's a sort of an existential issue. And same in Singapore. So they've really sort of marshaled every tool in the toolkit. They encourage, really require generations to stay together. So intergenerational relationships, really important. Young and old together is a real driver of purpose and value for both young and old. And that's sort of built into their housing policy. They encourage dropping barriers to work. Ageism is a big barrier to in the workplace, a big barrier to older workers who want to keep working. So people there work at a much higher percentage. They're big into lifelong learning. They encourage volunteerism. It's all the resources of society are marshaled to help older generations not be shut aside, not to think of themselves as in decline, but think of themselves as vital and really critical parts of society. And it's that attitudinal shift that I think is the most important part.
Yeah, found it fascinating that I think the statistic was that Singapore increased their life expectancy from 66 to 84 in just a few decades.
Yeah. So Singapore came, I won't get the numbers exactly right, so please don't check me on it. But their independence was roughly around 1963, the year I was born, just for benchmarking it for my own
When I was
purposes.
born.
Is that right? All right. So,
Yeah.
so a lot of good things happened in 1963. Let's agree on that. And their life expectancy was, I think 66, and now it's about 84. Korea, the other place I visited, has added 21 years to life during that sort of same stretch. It's unrivaled in sort of human history.
And how has ours changed since 63?
Well, not nearly as much. The average life expectancy in the U.S. is 79. I think in 63, it was probably around 69, 70. I mean, so our life expectancy has grown, right? So even though we have sort of fallen far behind some other countries, it's still grown. It's still sort of an amazing story about longer life. The codicil I would put on that, Jeff, though, is it's not necessarily longer, healthier life. We live in the U.S. Much longer in poor health than other countries. So about 12 years in poor health. So 79 is 79 is life expectancy, but 67 is the healthy life expectancy in the U.S. And that's also a challenge here.
Yeah. And since we're both approaching that, we want to make sure that we change that, right?
Yeah, boy, been better fast because we're getting there quickly, right?
Well, I'm hoping that my healthy life expectancy exceeds 100. I mean, my goal was 120 years is really kind of my goal. I don't know if I'll make that, but if I can make it, I want it to be healthy all the way and just have, the shortest period of what we call like the fourth age, where that's that age of decline and decrepitude. I want to keep that as short as possible, but what's the phrase now? It's like you want to live as young, as long as you can, as young as you can, or something like that, where you want to be living longer, younger. So.
Yeah. Well, I think the right goal, whether it's whatever your goal is, whether it's 120 or something short of that, or more than that, I think the goal is, as you rightly say, to live as much as what they call compression of morbidity. Spend as much of that time in good health as possible. And
so what are some of the lessons that the United States can learn from Singapore and Korea and these other countries?
Yeah. So first we begin with the notion. So the cultural notion that I think the sort of shared ageist notion here is to look at people over the age of 60 or 65, sort of takers from society. And it's sometimes called the decline narrative. People, hopefully even on this conversation over the age of 60, have a lot to offer. And I think we need to view them as that. The second thing is we should think about putting the generations together. We're actually the most age segregated country in the world. I just came back from Florida doing some reporting on one of the 55 plus communities. Other countries don't have that because they know bringing generations together is good for both generations. We need to change our education system to allow for lifelong learning. Most older adults want to learn, but the educational system doesn't support them. So there's just lots of things we can do to really create value and social connection for older adults that we just don't do yet.
Yeah, I think one thing that's come up a few times in conversation on this podcast where that, it would be nice if we could connect the primary schools, the universities, and the older generation all together. I mean, we should be building our senior living communities on or near college campuses so they can access, the classroom, but they can also interact with the students. So students can learn from the history that, the older people can bring to it. And we have a lot of schools that are, pre-med, pre-OT, pre-PT programs. They can benefit from having this whole audience of people that they can kind of work with and practice with and hone their skills on. And then on the other end, getting the elderly in with the classroom helps rejuvenate them, give them more life, and, can benefit the kids as well 100%. Well as the parents that are in that sandwich generation.
Yeah. Yeah. So much to be gained by bringing the generations together. I was also up, sounds like I travel a lot, but about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, I was up in Maine and I was visiting a place called Gorham House in a small town called Gorham, Maine. And Gorham House is one of the few, it's a nursing home, with, people as old as 101. But right in the entryway to it is a preschool.
Oh, wow.
And you can't imagine how happy the older folks are when they get a chance to hang out with 3, 4, 5-year-olds. And it's just sort of a joy to see. And the most interesting thing, the thing I actually learned there that I hadn't necessarily expected to learn, is the preschool teacher or principal or whatever the right title is. She told me that the elementary school teachers in Gorham say that the most empathetic kids in their class are the kids who come through that preschool. They're the ones who are used to seeing, if there's a kid in a wheelchair or has a disability, they're the ones who aren't afraid of them. They're the ones who greet them and bring them into the community because they've had that experience with older people and just know how to they instinctively now know how to work across differences. And that's actually a really beautiful thing that we don't have enough of in this country.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think we've gotten away from it as our generation, we tended to live a lot more in community with I know from when I was growing up, I had friends who, their grandparents, if they didn't live with them, lived in the neighborhood. And that's so different now. My kids have grown up, my mom was in Maryland, my dad was in Arizona, my in-laws are in Florida. Like most people from Long Island, New York, they all retired to Florida.
Yep.
His siblings that are all spread around, and you don't have those same family connections, let alone the community connections that we really need for people to age well.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really, really astute observation, right? We've spread out to our own sort of cultural and health benefits. The other thing I want to mention is not necessarily a crowd pleaser, but it is, I think, an important note, which is how long we work. In 1965, when our life expectancy was roughly 67, we worked till about age 65. Today, when our life expectancy is about 79, we work till about 65. That's sort of the average age of retirement for men. That doesn't make economic sense, but it also is not particularly good for our health because, if you go to Japan, as I did for my book, you'll find that everyone sort of associates retirement with loneliness and work with social engagement. So they work for their health. They know that they tend to work part-time, but they know in their 60s, 70s, and even 80s that that's the sort of forum for purpose, for social connection, for having a meaningful life. And our system doesn't support that. Our culture doesn't recognize it as actually important to our health, but it really is, in this day and age, one of the great sources of social connection when, many of the things that you described, Jeff, are wasting away.
If you're enjoying the Aging Well podcast, be sure to like, subscribe, or follow on your favorite platform so you will never miss an episode. And if you find our conversations helpful, please share the podcast with a friend because aging is something we're all doing and we're better at doing it together. And support our guests in this podcast financially by visiting the affiliate links in the episode description below and use the links or codes provided for discounts on products we have vetted and feel comfortable recommending to our valued viewers and listeners. Thank you. And now back to the podcast. And that kind of leads me to the question about ageism. You highlight the dangers of ageism and how American retirement culture actually isolates the older adults. How does intergenerational connection change the kind of equation for longevity?
Yeah. So, interesting set of questions. So familiarity, I guess the expression is familiar breeds contempt, but in truth, it's the other way around. Like familiarity, knowing other generation reduces the risk of ageism. Ageism is a health danger to us. Becca Levy from Yale has done extensive research that seniors with positive views of aging tend to live about 8 years longer than seniors who have negative views of aging. And we've spent a lifetime getting those views, integrating them from the sort of a youth-centric culture at large. If we can figure out ways to be less ageist, to bring the generations together, to make them less suspicious of each other, that's actually a very good thing for our health. Ageism is one of these weird things that we all have a stake in it, in the sense where we all hope to be older one day. And yet we don't really talk about it or think about it as we do otherism.
So what are the health costs of loneliness, and how do they compare to some of the risks that we find more familiar, factors like obesity, smoking, and those types of things?
Yeah. So Julianne Holtz Lundgren, I'm going to get the name wrong, so again, don't quote me. I should have looked that up. Who's a professor at BYU, has synthesized sort of hundreds of studies on this, and her study has said that being lonely, is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So, I mean, we all know that smoking 15 cigarettes a day is really, really bad for your health, for your longevity, and loneliness is the same thing. Don't smoke, don't be lonely. That's my very thoughtful advice for you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we have fewer and fewer people smoking anymore. I mean, I think that's declined over the last 20 years significantly, especially of the younger population. But that social isolation has just skyrocketed. I mean, I'm sure the statistics, when you compare social isolation today versus how many people were smoking 20, 30, 40 years ago, I would say it's probably far greater that we're in that case of social isolation than we have to worry about smokers.
Yeah. So, they social scientists track measures of loneliness and things like how many friends do you have? So the number of people who report that they have no friends has, I think, quadrupled over just the last 20 years. And they've also measured things like how much time do you spend online or with your phone? And those obviously have skyrocketed. And the thing that always sort of gets at me, because I have a 17-year-old, is that people in my son's age cohort spend about, I can't remember, it's 1 or 3 hours a day less with friends than our generation did. And that's just really, it's bad for socialization, it's bad for health, it's just bad for community. So those are the types of things that we need to really take on as a sort of a key public health indicator.
Yeah, I've seen that. I have a 17-year-old and a 20-year-old, and I've seen in their generation fewer and fewer kids rushing out to get their driver's license. I mean, when we were kids, it's like, I remember my dad actually had me learning how to drive before I was 16. We were driving around the neighborhood before I even had my permit because he wanted me to get my driver's license so that I could drive, use his car when he was traveling. But I wanted to be able to drive too, because that gave me access to my friends. Now it's like they want to, they're content with just staying home and interacting as they're playing a video game with their friends in a different location. Kids don't want to travel out to their friends anymore. And for us, it was a source of freedom. Now it's like, we don't really need to. And so they're not as interested in doing that. And with social media, with, the kids aren't on Facebook anymore. I think we've hijacked that from the kids, but they're interacting a lot more on social media as they are in person.
Yeah. I'm fascinated you said that, because my son is 17 and he doesn't even have his learner's permit yet. And he's sort of, I keep saying, let's go get it. And he's like, yes, I should. And then he never really wants to, because he's comfortable, as you say, connecting remotely with people.
Right. So for the listener or viewer who feels socially isolated, and I'm sure that's a lot of us, what is one small, realistic step they can take to start building meaningful connection?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different things. I'm going to point out one thing. If a different day, I would point out something else. So I spent, and I'll just sort of tell the story, the background story. So I went to South Korea, to tell a story about lifelong learning. And Korea has actually put a constitutional right to lifelong learning it's in their constitution now. And they sort of try to build a notion that education is not something that you do just for the first 20 years of your life, or 18 or 21 or whatever it is. It's something you need to do across the life, and even after you retire. So every city has a center for lifelong learning and classrooms scattered around the city. And I got to observe just how good that is for people. First of all, it gets them out of their house. It gets them into a group of people. It gets them interested in thinking. It gets them talking. All those is everything that we actually talk about being good for you comes from getting out of your house, engaged in community. So, and I look at the numbers for the U.S. Like, people want to be lifelong learners. They just don't know how to do that. And it turns out, and we don't encourage it, but there's actually lots of ways to do it. every town has a community college. Most are free to people over the age of 50. State of Georgia has a constitutional right to free lifelong learning for people over the age of 60. There are opportunities out there. It could be on a college campus, like you described, like they do at Arizona State, but mostly they're out there in different ways, and it just brings a natural community. Like we all learned in school, we all made friends in school because we were there together, sort of with common purpose. That's a thing that every one of us could do if we wanted to. We say we want to do, and it's available. If we try for that.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities there. And I think the more that the state and federal government kind of distances themselves from public universities, the harder it's going to be because, we just see tuition going up and going up and going up. And unless the institutions are willing to kind of take one for the team and allow older individuals to come in at a much reduced rate or even free. I mean, I would welcome older people to just come in and sit in my class because they bring such depth of knowledge and experience. Technically, we would not be allowed to do that because of, it's not HIPAA. What's the FERPA, the FERPA restrictions. We're not even allowed to have students sitting in the class that aren't registered for the class because there's all kind of different social issues with all that. But
what school do you teach at, Jeff?
I teach at Western Oregon University.
Yeah. So a lot of I don't know this. I don't know the rules in Oregon, but in my book I actually list. I have a partial list of states that provide through their public universities, often free, most often free. But occasionally, substantially reduced. In New Mexico, it's like $5 a credit unit. There are, so it may be different in Oregon, but there are at least 20 states, maybe more, that provide, by law, substantially reduced tuition and often free tuition to older adults. I don't think people know about it, but it's out there in a lot of places.
Yeah, so any of our listeners and viewers that are interested need to just kind of reach out and find out what the current laws are in their state. But it's something we should take advantage of. I mean, I'm sure that's what I will do once I retire from teaching. I'm welcome to, I feel good to teach as long as I can. I mean, as long as I am mentally capable and I'm not, still teaching stuff that, is from the 1980s exercise physiology, then I feel like I'm good to be in the classroom. It's as soon as I start kind of teaching from overhead projectors and things like that.
Film strips. Yeah.
But I mean, for myself, I'm actually finding that through this podcast, I'm bringing so much new content into my students because I'm learning in this process. And so as long as I'm learning and can provide that knowledge to somebody, then I want to keep teaching.
So one thing you said there is really interesting because it echoes something I heard in my reporting for this book. When I was in places like Japan, principally Japan, but others, I was really focused on older workers. I interview workers in their 70s, 80s, and I think even some into their 90s. And I would ask them almost as a conclusion to every interview, I would say, so how much longer do you think you'll want to work? And the answer is almost invariably was until I can't. It's actually sort of the anthem of my trip. And sort of people, they knew that their work was actually good for them and they didn't want to give it up until circumstances force their hands.
Yeah, and we should give everybody that opportunity to work as long as possible. But unfortunately, I think we tend to push people out a little bit sooner than they're ready. And just culturally too, it's almost like it's expected that you're a failure if you're not retiring younger. You haven't made enough money, so you got to keep working. But it's like, it's not about the money. It's about, well, it is, because if you're going to live to be 120, right, you're going to need some money.
Save up, right? You can't have a 58-year retirement, Jeff. No. That's hard to fund.
And just the idea of, retiring for 50 years, even 40 years, 20 years, to me, it's just like, that's so much dull, empty time. I want to be active and doing something.
So one of the stories I tell in the book, it's actually an organizing principle. When I took this my reporting trip in two phases. I did my Asia leg, and then I came home, and I did a European leg. And in between the two legs, I went to a wedding of the daughter and now son-in-law of close friends of ours. And we were assigned to my wife and I were assigned to table 23, which were the old folks. And so everyone, I knew some of them, I didn't know. The thing that actually only united us was our age, which is sort of like how they organize the tables. Pretty common. And I found myself really jealous of other tables because people I could tell were like talking about their adventures and what their future was like. And at my table, they were all talking about retirement and the opportunity to, and they didn't really have plans. People in retirement didn't really have plans. They talked about reading during the day and not feeling guilty. That sounds nice, but that's not 20 years worth. Someone was talking about taking a cooking class. That's great, but that's, you have 20, 30, hopefully 40 years of runway. Other people were talking about the next 40 with sort of big ideas and big plans. And we weren't, because we were been tuned to think of retirement as a time to wind down and do less. And that's just not a good recipe for health.
Right. So I'm amazed that, it's 62 and you're at the old person table. I find that very offensive.
Yeah. Well, we were at, they're lovely people. I don't want to out them, although I do in the book. So it was, there were 23 tables. We were number 23, and there's only 22 tables that could fit into the main sort of area. And there was then a step down. That was where our table was. It was almost like we were in the sort of old people segregated area. I'm sure they didn't think of it that way. And it was just a step away, but it sort of had that sense like this is the place where you go if you've got less to do. Yeah. And I didn't think that was such a energetic, invigorating idea.
I love when you intertwine the generations and the stories and the conversations you get at the table. Right. We did a thing at my church about a month or two ago where I guess annually they do a birthday party for all of the members of the congregation that are over the age of 90 or they're having their 90th birthday. And there was one woman there that was 100 years old. And I said, I got to go talk to her. And I still need to kind of maybe get her on this podcast. But I said, so, what's your secret to being 100 years old? And she didn't talk about herself. She said, oh, my dad lived to be 106. And, and she starts talking about all these adventures. He had done so much in his life before the age of 84 that he wrote his first autobiography at around 84. But he did so much after that he had to write a second volume to it.
I love it.
I think he was 94. He went to the North Pole, and I guess the Russian crew captain, had the engineer form a key for him. It was the key to the North Pole because he was like the oldest person to ever go to the North Pole.
Amazing.
But he continued to do all kind of stuff. And so she's like, he continued to exercise every day, went to the gym every day until the end of his life. And he was just a very active but socially engaged individual. And she was just kind of living the same pattern that he was. And she was still a spry, fun person to talk to. And it's like, I love talking to the older people. I mean, I know for my students, I'm that older person, right? Which it's funny, they ask them, how do you define, older adult? And they all kind of start to squirm in their seats because they know I'm 62 and they don't know what to say. And so they always kind of bump it a few years beyond how old they know I am.
Right. And it's funny. I'm actually writing an article right now on why 65 is considered old. Which has been considered old in the United States for sort of, the most commonly accepted definition of old for probably close to a century. And in that century, our lives of, our life expectancy has increased by probably 15 years. Our physical capacity has increased at the time. I mean, we are much, our generation is just much more physically capable at similar age than our parents' generation. And yet we still use that same benchmark as if there's something scientifically determined about 65. We actually can trace the 65-year back to something that Bismarck made up in 1880 as far as the first pension plan at a time when life expectancy was 46. He didn't want to pay people out, so he made the retirement age 65. And somehow that's become sort of stuck in our collective brains. And it's just not the right way to think about aging and old age anymore.
And friendships become a lot more difficult once we retire. We've been talking about social connections, and I was in Colorado Springs last weekend, and actually I was in Denver when I met up with an old friend of ours from Michigan. He retired about 5 years ago, and he's about our age. I think he's a couple years older, but he's been retired for about 5 years, and he was just kind of lamenting about the loneliness and not having friends. And realizing that all of those work relationships were really not as deep as, we would really want. And so when you retire, now suddenly not only are you away from all these work relationships, but you're now also away from really deep relationships. And so you've noted that it takes courage to make new friends later in life. What would you say to someone who feels too old to start over socially?
Well, you're not. I mean, I would say you're never too old, right? And I think one of the things I would say is people have interests that don't change throughout life. I mean, you can be um, the thing that brings people together, often common interests. Often it's around work or school that they sort of circumstances create. But if you're interested in pickleball or NASCAR or playing bridge, there's communities for you out there. And there's no reason that you can't make friends of different ages, right? Because people of all ages love NASCAR and people of all ages love pickleball. I played my first game of pickleball last week. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, I'm undefeated.
Okay.
But I'm undefeated, but winded still from it.
Sure.
So I would say, there are opportunities out there of any age, and your health. I would say to you, your health depends upon it, not just sort of your sense of loneliness, but how long you live and how healthy you live.
Yeah, I had Becky Blue on this podcast, and she wrote a book called Turning, and she talks about kind of what it was like to kind of cross the 60-mile mark. And she talked about how one of her goals is to have a friend in every generation. I'm not sure how that works for the kids that are, under 10 years old, but, some of our society might find it a little odd if we say, my friend that's in kindergarten. But, she is very purposeful in trying to make sure that she's interacting with people of all ages. And I think that's important for all of us. I think that's an important lesson. And you're never too old to kind of interact. I mean, it's easy for me being a college professor to have, friends that are in their mid-20s because my graduates, I try and stay connected to them. And I'm around 20-year-olds for so much. But there's always coaching, or if you're, a musician or something, like giving lessons. There's different ways that we can interact with the younger people.
Yeah.
And, we're never too old to start over socially, as you've said.
Yeah. No, I think I love that story from Becky Blue. I had not heard that. That's wonderful.
Yeah. She also took up ballet after she turned, I think, 50 or 60. And she talks about, being in these classes with these young girls.
Yeah.
How much energy they have. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I bet that was, obviously the physical exercise of ballet is good for you, but just the social connection that brought,
right.
The energy that brings, just as important.
So you make the case for working longer as a path to health and connection. How do you envision the future of work supporting longevity?
So it's a very interesting question. So first of all, I think one of the things we have to recognize is that the traditional labor force, 18 to 64, as a percentage of the population is shrinking everywhere, right? In every advanced economy. So there's just not going to be enough people in that age cohort to fuel growth and pay for the cost of retirement. One of the things the U.S. has actually up till now been relatively immune for that because we have high rates of immigration, and we should not. Immigrants are younger; they're part of the labor force. They help pay for the cost of retirement. Obviously, the political environment has changed, so we're going to grapple with the notion that we need older workers just to sustain performance in the economy. That's not simply saying that. So lots of things have to fall out from there. One is we have to get past these ageist notions that being younger means you're smarter or more energetic. You need to recognize the wisdom and value experience of older generations. Two, older generations just not necessarily going to want to work the same way they have for years before. So if you go to Japan, where I told you that people over the age of 65 still want to work and do in huge numbers, in part is because they've really innovated around part-time work, remote work, job sharing, harnessing technology to support older workers, especially older blue-collar workers. So they've tried to sort of create essentially an older workers economy that is responsive to the needs of older workers. We're going to have to start doing that in the United States if we want to support, if we want to continue to grow as a nation, but also support this group of people over 60, over 65, over 70 who want to work and can still offer really important things to the economy and to companies.
So if we want as a society to make aging well the norm rather than the exception, what needs to change at the cultural or the policy level, or both?
Yeah, so I think in this case, politics is downstream of culture. Forget who said that. It wasn't me, but they were right. So this has to start with changing sort of the cultural conversation about what you do in the second half of life and treating the idea of the second half of life as being as important and as being as valuable personally and communally as the first. Once we do that, I think a lot of things fall out from the policy level in terms of supporting, encouraging people to live intergenerationally and work intergenerationally, support old workers, support lifelong learning. And that happens in pockets, but by no means on sort of a broader national basis. I think truthfully, if there's anything that the government could do to support healthy aging, there's lots of things they could do. But if number one would be to sort of help make America socially connected again.
How would that fit on a hat?
Well, you'd have to change the acronym, but sure.
Yeah. I talk a lot, especially even with my students, that they have a responsibility to change their communities to make aging more accessible and just making healthy living more accessible. We have communities. I live in Portland. They claim to be bike friendly. It is not that bike friendly. You live in DC. You know what bike friendly is. I mean, my wife was there before we got married, and she talked about how she could bike from Alexandria into downtown DC without having to really encounter cars, without traffic and all those types of things. That makes that activity so much more accessible. But even just putting bike lanes in doesn't necessarily make it easy for people to be more physically active.
Yeah.
We don't have sidewalks that their kids could walk to school when they were in elementary school. I grew up walking everywhere. I grew up in Pittsburgh. We had to walk to school. We didn't have buses. Now, my daughter, when she was in elementary, middle school, the bus literally picked her up at the end of our cul-de-sac, which was like 3 houses down, and it stopped at that end of the same block. So it made 2 stops within really an easy walking distance for anybody with any level of physical ability.
Yeah. It's I've seen others, other cities really dedicate themselves to making an environment which is people are outside walking. Like Barcelona has actually shut down lots of streets, closed them off to cars, and sort of create an environment where people can bike and walk and sit, on benches, all I think for both physical opportunity, for physical activity, and also for social connection. You don't meet people when you're in cars. Right. You honk at them, you give them the finger,
Yeah, you're in DC. That's right.
Yeah. We do that a lot. When you're outside and you're sitting or walking, it's an entirely different environment.
I think another thing is we need to change the architecture of our housing developments. I don't know if you've noticed it. On the East Coast, still, from my experience, the older communities, you still have the front porch. Again, the community I grew up in, every house had a front porch, and you'd see the grandmother sitting on the front porch and waving at you as you walk by. You knew your neighbors, you saw your neighbors. Now we live in a kind of a society where we're building these houses that have huge decks in the backyard or backyard decks, no front porch. You basically get out of the car, you go in the house, and you're not out facing your neighbors. And we have fences around all the yards as well.
Yeah.
And it's like that's the worst thing for social connection.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. In our zoning laws, we've elevated sort of the big single family units with houses with setbacks, on streets with no sidewalks, where you have to drive everywhere. And those are all indicators of a society that doesn't care about social connection. If you go to Singapore, not to keep talking about Singapore, they don't have houses by and large. They just have apartment blocks, and they build them with relatively small apartments and big communal areas. So they sort of try to force people out of their apartments by, as a design ethic. So they invest a lot in communal areas and, much less in the interior of each apartment. So that's a result of intentional policy around zoning and design that we really need to take. With an aging country, we have to also think about accessibility for, people who are 70, 80, 90, because a lot of our housing stock, probably in Pittsburgh, where you used to live, and DC, lots of stairs, lots of ups and downs, not universal design. Those are all things that are really hard for people to age in place.
Yeah. As I go back to Pittsburgh, sometimes I wonder about that. It's like, how do old people get around here? But they managed when we were younger. And I think that was part of what helped keep them more fit, more active, was the fact that they had to maintain a level of mobility in order to just be able to do what they needed to do. And so they were more active just by nature. And that's what we see in the blue zones as well, is that they're walking up steep hills. They're not necessarily going to the gym. We live in a society where we're going to drive 5 miles to the gym to walk on a treadmill.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Or we won't drive, we won't walk up a hill because, we can drive.
Yeah.
And so there just needs to be a lot of cultural changes that I think hopefully this podcast is beginning to bring to light. And I know today you're kind of bringing some of that to us. So what are you doing personally to age well? This is a question we ask of all our guests, so you can't escape it.
Oh yeah, that's a tough one because I'm much more sort of the do as I say, not as I do. So I think now a lot. So first of all, I've sort of changed my entire views about work. I think about things a lot more than I used to in terms of social connection. So I'm now I'm going to work until I can't. And I think about how do I create sort of my work life into my 60s and 70s that I can do it in a way that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I think, from sort of a building relationships point of view, I haven't really sort of figured out how to do that. But I have sort of the building blocks for trying to build community and stay involved in community, whether it's volunteering or lifelong learning, things that I can do to make sure I have relationships after I retire. And I think the other thing is, Jeff, you made an important point. It's like where we live and the community we live makes a whole lot of difference about how you age. My in-laws are down in Florida, like yours are. I don't think that's the right thing anymore, or I don't think that's the right thing. I think about how do I be in a place where I'm closely physically connected with different generations and frankly, friends of a lifetime. I think it's a very odd thing that people pick up and move. They leave behind relationships of a lifetime to move to someplace where they kind of have to start over. And that just make a whole lot of sense to me.
So what gives you hope that for the future of aging, especially in America, that it can be more connected, meaningful, and healthy?
Yeah. So I think from my perspective, sort of my little keyhole on this, I think the idea of social health is finally getting some traction. We've started talking about loneliness as a cause of ill health, and now I think we're starting to talk about social health being as reflected in this conversation as being a real building block for good health. And I think that's a different conversation that we've had, that would have been had than 3 years ago or 4 years ago. COVID, for all its pain, was a lesson about the importance of social connection. And I think that's actually sort of spreading in the culture. Now, I think that all the arrows are still running in the wrong direction, but I think the idea that we need to change that is gaining traction, hopefully will lead to positive change.
So what kind of shocked you the most in writing the book? What did you learn that you just weren't aware of that just seems so surprising to you?
I think all of this is surprising me. So I think the first thing I would say it never really dawned on me that social health would be the sort of a core strategy for public health. I mean, I always thought, even when I did the reporting that I described going to Texas and New York, social health there was really the product of individual circumstances. So in Latino communities on the Mexican border, they were the result of strong family connections. In Co-op City, it was a result of actually affordable and stable housing, which you often don't get in New York City. So people move in there because it was affordable and they wouldn't leave for 50 years. And that led to sort of much stronger social connections. But those were those were unintentional things. Those are a product of other things that were happening. I think what surprised me is when I went to these countries, when I went to Italy or places like that, it was the affirmative public policy of these places, that they're building sort of countrywide national strategies to help people in the second life live important, meaningful, connected, purposeful lives. Still in the United States, when you talk to people about what are you going to do for the people over the age of 50 or 60, they think about healthcare first. They don't think about how to keep them from needing healthcare, keep them healthy. And that's the thing that I was really impressed me about this, about these other much healthier countries and their approach to social health.
Yeah, the state of Oregon, I think it was about 2 years ago now, they passed a bill that changed the Constitution to state that universal health care is a foundational human right. But there's no addressing that access to universal health is a fundamental right. And, it bothers me, and I bring this up to my students all the time. It bothers me that the idea of universal health care precedes the idea of universal health, because we can't afford universal health care if people aren't healthy.
Yep.
And so the first thing we should be looking at is how are we making all of the American population as healthy as possible so that it reserves those dollars for healthcare to go to people that are sick beyond their own control. People that are born with that, naturally with diseases or genetically or injuries or, just the oldest of oldest that, of course, bodies just begin to break down naturally. They're going to need healthcare. But for me as a 62-year-old, I don't feel like I should be needing healthcare yet. I should be, okay, do I have access to gyms? Do I have access to activities? Do I have access to healthy food? Which, as a middle-class white male in America, I pretty much have those. There are populations that just don't have access to healthy food or activity or safe communities. And so those are things I think we really need to be focusing on.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. The people who study that, one of the phrases is health takes place outside the doctor's office. It's not that doctors don't matter and hospitals don't matter. Keeping people healthy in all the ways you describe, much more important than life expectancy in healthcare. In Singapore, there's a place that it's a demonstration project called the Queenstown Health District. That really is trying to put all those things together: access to food, access to social connection, access to intergenerational relationships, because that's the idea, is keep people healthy. In Singapore, the health district means health. In the U.S., when we talk about health districts, it's really an unhealthy district because that's where all the doctors and the hospitals are.
Right.
It's just a different way of thinking that we need to emulate.
Yeah, we have to rethink what health means.
For sure.
So what do you want the viewer and the listener to take away from reading your book? And obviously, we're going to ask you in a moment, how they can access the book, but we want everybody to read the book. What do you want them to take away? What's the takeaway from the book?
Thank you for the plug. I think the principal takeaway from the book is to understand the importance of social health and social health infrastructure, to see that others have done this and that we can do it too. So it's full of not just the policy, but also sort of individual tips that can help people access social health for themselves, to improve it. As we try to improve the infrastructure, they can improve it for themselves, their friends, and their families. So I think contribute both to the social dialogue around it, but also hopefully help people themselves be better socially connected as they age.
Okay. And is there anything we neglected to talk about today?
Jeff, I think you've exhausted me in the book, so I appreciate that. It's been a great conversation.
I hope it's exhausted in a good way.
Yeah, totally good way.
I exhaust people all the time.
Totally good way.
All right. So how can our listeners and our viewers connect with you, learn more about you, and more importantly, find the book?
So the book comes out on October 7th. It'll be available in bookstores, online, everywhere you get books. And you can follow me on a lot of different platforms. You can listen to my podcast, which is from the Stanford Center on Longevity, called Century Lives. Follow the Longevity Project at longevity-project.com. You can watch our Instagram channel called Grand People. You can subscribe to our newsletters, 3 Not So Bad Things About Aging and Longevity, or the new one, which is only on social connection, called Healthy to 100. So there's just a lot of ways to interact with us, and I hope you do. It's a great community we've built, and excited about the idea of aging in a better way in the future.
Well, we'll put all those links in the description notes, and I am excited about a healthy aging population for the future. I mean, that's the whole point of this podcast and why we're emphasizing "the" in here, because I want people to understand that aging isn't something to be feared. It's not something to be perceived as a decline. It's just we're all aging. I mean, we talk about aging well beginning at conception, if not even before, when you look at epigenetics. But we're all aging from the moment we pop out of the womb. So every birthday, you're a little bit older. What does that mean for the next birthday and the future and everything else? And for our society, because we don't want to be burdened with a bunch of old, sick people that are continuing to have to rely on traditional definitions of health.
Yeah. That's right. So, older people as an asset to communities, not as a burden. That's the goal.
Right. I think we need to understand that we are an asset. I mean, I have more wisdom now than I did 10 years ago.
Yeah, for sure.
I hope.
Let's say yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this was my pleasure. I really enjoyed this. Just keep doing what you're doing. I hope our listeners and viewers will connect with you and certainly get the book, but just keep doing what you're doing and keep aging well.
Thank you, Jeff. And thank you for having me on the podcast. It was a fun conversation.
Yeah. Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.